Hello. I'm Matt Brennan. I'm editor-in-chief of The Envelope, the Los Angeles Times Awards magazine. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm really thrilled to have a conversation about these three films with this great group of filmmakers. Let's start off by welcoming Petra Costa and Alessandra Orofino of Apocalypse in the Tropics. Gabriel Novis of Alice. And Andre Hayato Saito of Amarela. Petra and Alessandra, I wanted to start with you because we just finished your film. Petra, in the film, you sort of say that you, because of your secular upbringing, really didn't have a lot of knowledge or exposure to evangelicalism. So, what were your preconceptions about it before this project, and what sort of got you on the path of wanting to learn more? And then, Alessandra, I sort of have a similar question for you.
Well, I grew up, as I say, with a very secular upbringing. My parents were against religion. That was the religion they transmitted to me. But I grew up with a lot of appreciation for religion and for people who had faith. And I didn't have, as my mother has, a hatred towards some even religious groups. I had more of a sympathy. That moment that is at the genesis of the film for me, where I beat in the center of Brazilian democracy during the beginning of the impeachment process and our political crisis, not politicians discussing the crisis, but a pastor trying to evangelize me, who gifted me a Bible, Pastor Cabo Daciolo, was a very moving moment for me, because after he asked me to accept Jesus, I was embraced by 10 women, and it was one of the most moving experiences I had in Congress. I was there already for a year. It was very arid, very depressing, and it was the first moment where I felt embraced, literally embraced. And I think the film is born from that contradiction of I really didn't want this to be happening here, but at the same time, how transcendent this experience is. So that's the contradiction that the film wanted to investigate.
Alessandra, in a way, the film is sort of structured around Petra's discovery of the importance of evangelicalism in the rise of far-right politics in Brazil, but your work is already deeply invested in politics. So what to you was kind of the learning curve or the learning process on this in terms of what it illuminated for you that you didn't know going in?
Yeah, so I had spent, before making this film, over a decade working, organizing communities around the country to participate more actively in politics and policymaking on behalf of their communities. So what do you need as a community? How do you pressure decision makers to get what you need? And so on and so forth. And then I, for many years, ran a comedy news show called Greg News, covering politics for a very wide, mostly young audience. And religion was something that we would touch upon sometimes. And as an organizer, one of the things that you have to admire about churches, and in particular the evangelical churches that have this kind of very decentralized model, is how well organized they are and how deeply ingrained in territories and communities in place they are. So I'm admirative of the model in many ways. If you think about a Catholic church, I didn't have a secular upbringing. I had a religious upbringing and a Catholic upbringing, but the Catholic Church is very centralized, right? It's the Pope and the Vatican and the bishops, and there is a hierarchy there, and the evangelical churches are decentralized and have this presence that is kind of everywhere because of that. So in a way, they're much more adapted to the world that we live in. So you have to admire it in that way. For me, the learning curve was less about religion itself or faith, because that was already part of my life, or the importance of the evangelical churches and communities, because that was something that as an organizer I was already aware of. But it was more about that imbrication, that deep connection between certain leaders of evangelical churches. And I think Silas Malafaia is a great example of that. He's not the only one, but he is one of the most important and influential ones, and a great example of it. So that connection between these leaders and power. And of course, I knew that religious leaders were harnessing and in many ways manipulating faith to gain access to power, but I don't think I had the exact measure of just how deeply ingrained this was, and the kind of access that they had, and the kind of project that they were trying to implement. I didn't see religious fundamentalism as a fundamental threat to democracy. There were many other threats. Disenfranchisement of young people, and the fact that Brazil never really overcame its heritage of slavery and inequality, many other things. But religious fundamentalism felt, in a way, like something that had been solved centuries ago, that was no longer central to the discussion of healthy democracies. And I think the experience of making the film and being in contact with this material, like, just very clearly illuminated just how contemporary this discussion, unfortunately, still is, of separation of church and state.
Now, Gabrielle, I want to talk about your film originates with a personal connection, both to surfing and to your subject. Talk about that connection, and then talk about, like, what was the moment where that connection turned into, I want to make a film about this?
Sure. I grew up in Maceió, a city in the northeast of Brazil, and I feel that, at least growing up there when I was really young, going to school, people will kind of try to do very similar things. They're all doing the same thing. People play soccer, they listen to forró, which is a specific type of music from the northeast. And I never, it's amazing, by the way, but I never really fit in. That wasn't my jam. And I always felt like an outcast in my own city, in my own community. And I grew up surfing, and that it wasn't different then. Back then, not back then, still is. My own friends, they would bully me just because I would dress differently. My shorts were too short, or I like to paint my nails, or whatever. Just how I like to style myself. But they don't really understand that. They expect you to look in a certain specific way. And that this thing has been bothering me since forever. Long story short, I moved to the U.S. to pursue my career as a filmmaker. And going back to Brazil, reconnected to Alice after many, many years. We grew up in the same apartment building. Her father was really, really good friends with my father, and we'll always meet at the elevator, and then later on we'd start hanging out at the skate park and surfing. I reconnected with her at a bar, and we were just catching up. And during this conversation, she told me that she wasn't really, surfing anymore, and I felt like, oh, this is wrong. What's happening? Who's doing this? I started to investigate and try to understand a little bit more. And right away, I decided that I wanted to try to take her back to the water. It wasn't even about making a documentary. I was like, oh, let's go surfing together. That's important. I have to get in the water. We're surfers. We surf. And from that, I approached her. I was like, hey, why don't we try to make a documentary about her life? It's so authentic. Your personality is so beautiful. So she was really inspired to me, coming from Maceió, where everyone's doing the same thing, thinking the same way. She was just doing her own, creating her own world in a world that did not exist. I find that very inspiring. And I just really wanted to show her work and art to the world. She's an artist, and she really inspires me. So the film was born from the idea of obviously getting her back to the water, trying to find the right tone that will communicate with surfers from back home, and most importantly, just letting Alice fly as high as she can.
Andre, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about, you mentioned backstage that you, for a long time, had a fraught relationship with your Japanese-Brazilian ancestry, but then you went through a period where you sort of started researching it and getting kind of interested in it. Can you talk about that moment where you started to sort of turn the corner, and then how that led you to a film like Amarela?
Well, Amarela happens in 1998, and I was 14 at that period. And it was always, and I realized today I realize how I used football as a tool to belong to the Brazilian identity, and I was always struggling to belong. I was always trying to be Brazilian, so that's why I've denied my origins for more than 30 years of my life. So I hated to be called as Japanese, Chinese, Oriental, and my whole life was like that, you know. But then when I went to Japan for the first time with my parents, it was their first time, I started researching my roots and getting in peace with it. So I have met like a friend of my grandmother, and I started filming. She used to talk to me in Japanese a lot, and people were like, "Oh, Andre doesn't speak Japanese," and she said like "kokoro to kokoro." She was saying that from heart to heart we speak the same language, and then it was really mind blowing. And then we started making films. I'm looking at Mayra because she really was with me in this investigation. And then I think, as I said, I believe in cinema as an instrument of healing, and I've felt with my 3 last short films that I started to really try to understand and accept my Japanese ancestry. So I feel that cinema helped me a lot with this process.
You raise sort of your memories of using football as a way of kind of defining your Brazilianness. All 3 of these films, whether it's politics and religion, whether it's surfing, whether it's football, are kind of asking a question, which is sort of what makes a Brazilian. I'm wondering, obviously the answer in each of these films is not one thing only, but I'm curious for any of you to sort of talk about how these projects helped you kind of understand your definition of what makes a Brazilian.
I think our film is very much about Brazil becoming a different Brazil. It's in a process of very fast transformation, and it's a country that doesn't even recognize itself in the mirror anymore because it has been so intense and rapid. Like until 2012, no one would say that, except for Bolsonaro, maybe, no one listened to him then that much, but that would say that they were of the right because of the trauma of the dictatorship. The right would say they were center. And then in 2013, with those protests, which are very complex protests, people started for the first time to have pride in saying that they are right or far right. And the way also the evangelical religion has been reshaping Brazilian identity is very little explored, given its dimension. It's completely altering many, many aspects of the culture. And then there's something that the film doesn't address, which is also altering Brazil very much, which is the expansion of the agro industry in the center of the country, which is tied to evangelicalism, because much of those people, that new elite is an evangelical Bolsonaro supporting elite. So I think that is the question of our film. What is this new Brazil?
And in many ways, I was watching the 2 short films before our film, and there is something that, to me, one of the most telling scenes in our film is that little excerpt of the interview with Silas when he says, "Oh, no. Democracy is the absolute rule of the majority. And there's no room in his conception of democracy for minority rights. And therefore, no room for this idea that we are a multi-racial continental country with many cultures and faiths and ideas and identities that need to coexist in order for the country to even stand as it is, right? And that fight, that battle for the soul of the country, and who gets to define it? Do you define it through pluralism, or do you define it through this kind of weird contorted idea of democracy where majority rule becomes the defining thing? That is what's being played out right now, and that has implications for the themes that our film touches upon: democracy itself, institutions, elections, etc. But it also has, of course, implications for the faith of the trans community in Brazil, and for ethnic minorities in Brazil in general. And that is not just happening in Brazil. This idea, like, what does it mean to live in a democracy? Does it mean that we all have equal stake in the places where we're in, and we are respected for who we are, and we find ways to live together in difference? Or does it mean that we must comply to this very authoritarian idea of majority rule? That is the main question in Brazilian politics today, maybe, and in a way, it kind of unites all of our films.
And just to add, and that is the project of majority rule of Malafaia is a project of white male supremacy.
Yeah, because it's not a numerical majority. It's this idea of the majority as it is. Yeah,
where imported from the United States. From the south of the United States, unhappy with the Civil War. Most of these churches come from that history, right, of the United States, which is something Brazilians, most evangelical Brazilians are black and adopt a religion that comes from a root of white supremacy.
Gabrielle and Andre, what has the reaction been from the communities that you depict in your films, which are marginalized communities and sort of are being sort of tried to cut out of the political process by what Malafaia is arguing for in Apocalypse in the Tropics? What's the reaction been to getting to see themselves in films like yours, which is a really powerful experience, I expect?
I'll speak for my experience doing screenings and with Alicia. We have been receiving all sorts of reactions, and it's very interesting because I have like a WhatsApp group back home with all the surfers from my hometown, and we grew up together surfing, and everyone kind of knows each other. And just them knowing that I did this film, I could already see some hate popping up in the messages. And it's very strange because I'm doing this for the love of surfing. I'm doing this film because I want surfing to be this inclusive space where everyone can surf and everyone should surf. And what's happening is kind of the opposite. Now I feel like, oh, maybe I don't want to surf with these guys anymore myself. Reactions on screening. Sorry, I'm losing my point here. We had a screening yesterday, and that was really, really beautiful. We have been going to all these beautiful film festivals, traveling around with the film. Alicia has been attending to some of them, which is very, very exciting and special. But we did a tiny screening yesterday. It was like a secret private screening for this group of skaters in Venice. It's called Girls Swirl, and there's a bunch of girls that get together to skate and empower each other. And they hear that Alicia was coming to LA for the first time, and they really wanted to meet her. They were very excited to meet her. We're not supposed to screen the film. We're just supposed to be a group skate, but they insisted in watching it. I was like, okay, you guys can see it. And to me, that was the most special one. The projection was terrible. The sound was terrible. It was a really tiny projector at a surf shop, and everyone was just laying on the floor. But I don't think any screening will ever beat this one, because I could see that she was really feeling at home within her community, and the girls were really cheering for her, and they were all emotional, and I think she made great friends last night. This morning, they picked her up to go surfing, which was really, really cool. Can you believe it? She's here in LA now, surfing with all these girls. This is crazy.
I love this story.
Yeah, it was. I was very excited about that. We really worked hard to make this happen. I think Lindsay's here somewhere. She kind of helped us organizing this get together. But I think from now on, whatever screen we have, no screens will beat this one. That felt true to herself, true to who she is, and that was the most important reaction that we had so far with this film. Her own community, girls that they're like-minded and think the way she thinks, and that was fun to watch.
For me, it was really interesting when we screened at TIFF, and there many Indian Canadians and Japanese Canadians came to talk to me that they resonated with the film, with the message, and with this feeling of being in an in-between space. You know, this spot, it's like really weird because you're always like affirmed as something that you don't recognize, you know. So I think it was really touching and mind-blowing when I saw that it was a film from children of diasporas across the globe, you know. And it was beautiful to see the Asian Brazilian community because they saw themselves represented in a story told from within. So our crew the majority of the crew were Asian Brazilians. And it was really touching to see like ourselves there co-creating together and really like putting our stories that we are very used to hear or to see told by white people, actually. So I think for Asian Brazilians, we're starting to discuss the racial and the racial subject, and even in my family, it's like something that it's a taboo. You know, many people from my family, they don't consider themselves yellow, for example, because it's something that they didn't grow up talking to. So it's very recent and very alive. You know, so regarding national identities, I really feel that our identity, is fluid, complex, and an ever-changing movement, you know.
And I think that's a segue into a question that I had for Petra and Alessandra about the sort of importance of the architecture of Brasilia as a visual metaphor in your film. Both those sort of beautiful shots of the empty buildings sort of in its complete mode, and then the shots of the destruction caused on January 8th and sort of that juxtaposition. I guess I'm curious, like, to go back to the question of kind of national identity and national politics. Why was it important for you to sort of construct the film with those images of Brasilia at the center of it? And talk a little bit about the process of just like getting the shots from before and then being on site during January 8th and then the aftermath and what that was like as filmmakers.
So the film was very much built in the edit room because first we were just filming too much, like compulsively.
Really?
Yeah, I think we were both in a kind of trance of living the worst moment in history. And thinking that every moment would be the last. It was like this apocalyptic trance that you must be in right now. Yes. I do not have any envy. We've been there. It's horrible, but there is a moment that you will get out of it, I hope. But yeah, filming was like surviving. And so I don't know how many cemeteries we filmed, how many hospitals. We filmed the entire parliamentary commission that was investigating Bolsonaro's mishandling of the pandemic. Nothing got into the film.
Not a single scene. You can imagine how happy that makes me as the producer.
We had 3 other characters that disappeared.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we're filming a lot. So Brasilia was nowhere in this film in the first year. And then once our amazing editor, Jordana Berg, together with Vitor, like digested that material, and we didn't pay for a psychologist. We should have. And we saw like a 6-hour cut. Something started to emerge from the cut itself. First, the protagonism of Malafaia, and that thread of that there would be one layer of the film that would follow the political development through having Malafaia as a protagonist and together with Bolsonaro and Lula. That we had our holy trinity. And then but that layer, I always knew that wasn't enough, because what interested me in Malafaia was his speech. Where was this man's way of thinking coming from? Not what he was saying, but not how he was moving, but what was moving him. And that drew me to Billy Graham, to Darby, to the book of Revelation. So that was another layer. And the other layer was democracy. And then we were gifted January 8th when we didn't know, we thought our film would end in also something that went to the garbage.
We were both already on vacation.
But we filmed Lula's inauguration in detail, and that's all in the trash. And then they gave us January 8th, and that informed Brasília as like a vertebra of the film.
Yeah, there was something coming out of January 8th, right, Petra? When we saw the scenes, it felt they're not just destroying these buildings, they're destroying this idea.
And they're fulfilling the prophecy of that pastor in the beginning of the film who says God will take over the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. That's the fulfillment of that prophecy. And they wrote in the window, "Happy is the nation where God is the Lord."
Two thoughts on the January 8th coverage. We did have a cameraman, a cinematographer, who went to the protests, but his memory card was stolen and chewed on, so we couldn't use that. It was very scary, and he had to leave. But then we were the first camera crew on site the next day, so we're there at 5 a.m. the next day, and no one had filmed the destruction. I think we were the only camera crew on site after that. So.
It's very powerful. I don't want to eat too much into the reception time because I'm hogging you from everyone else. I did want to ask Gabrielle and Andre, one, if you sort of have ambitions to turn your films into features, and have you changed your mind since hearing Petra and Alessandra answer my last question?
You can go ahead. You can start. For Alicia, no, I'm really happy with what it is. I think it was a time in her life that we captured, and she's in constant movement like water. I believe that's where she belongs. And I think the film, it is what it is, and I was glad to document a little bit of who she is. She's got so much to share and tell as a person, as an artist. She's many things, the same way that the film represents many things to a point that I don't even need to do a feature because that's already a lot, very complex. We thought a lot about that, like even the language and how we wanted to make this. I really wanted to try to find a way that will represent her in the right way, and I think she is everything. She doesn't have to be one thing, she doesn't have to be put in a box, the same way that she even says that in the film. And that's why the film has different, mixed medias and aspect ratios and changes. It's really supposed to represent this constant evolution and motion and flow. So I think this is it. Whatever you guys watched, it's going to be this forever. No features. Annalise.
So my last 3 short films, I called it a trilogy of ancestrality. And the 2 first were, the first and the second were doc and doc fiction. And then the third, I was like, I need to make a fiction. And then Amarela is a proof of concept for the future. So I didn't expect to go so far with this short, but it's a proof of concept of a feature that we have like 50% of the funds raised. So we're waiting for the Brazilian money because it's an international co-production between Brazil, Germany, France, and Japan. And 2 months ago we've been in Japan. Well, that's a spoiler, but we've been in Japan scouting locations because there are some scenes there.
It's coming.
Yeah, and so very excited to shoot it next year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Parabéns.
Congratulations to all of you on this great work, and thank you for taking the time. Congratulations.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you.